Hey, greetings everybody. I'm Gerd Leonhard, futurist in Zurich, Switzerland. Merhaba, buongiorno, bom dia, buenas tardes. It's great to be here with you today for the 12th edition of GerdTalks. GerdTalks is where we tackle interesting topics, sometimes with guests or sometimes with just me. And today it's a great pleasure to have with me Aline Frankfort, which I'll introduce in just a minute. We have a very timely topic on this show. You know, right now it kind of seems like hope is something that we really have to go searching for, and optimism seems like the exemption. And so this is a very, very good opportunity to talk about why we have hope, why I feel like that we can make a good future. And I've worked with Aline a bunch of times in the past, and some of the things that she says about why there's hope for a future and why we need optimism is such a good fit that I decided to invite her to the show. So the way that's going to work, just like all GerdTalks, you have the opportunity to comment using the chat function, and that works best if you are actually logged in on LinkedIn or YouTube or Twitter, so we can see who you are. We tend to take the questions from people with an ID more than others. There's no way right now to do a call in or so. We're working on that. Eventually we'll have that too. So right now it's commenting, and then my team will pick out the questions and bring them right into the conversations, okay? So that's kind of where we're going with this. You know how it works. We'll have a recording later and also edits of the recording so you can watch on my YouTube channel, GerdTube.com. So on this topic, I'm delighted to have Aline with me. So Aline, here's a short bio of Aline. I love this thing. This is from our website, the Futures Agency, where we have what she calls herself an eye-opener, So welcome, Aline. Tell us briefly what you do and who you are.
I'm Aline Frankfort. I'm a woman completely dyslexic, living between the possible and the impossible. And my practice is what I call the art of reperception, which is not exactly as you, Gerd. I'm not a futurist. I'm working on how to think and how to see the future, taking the point of view that our worldviews are the only thing we see. So we don't see the world, we see our lenses. And my practice is about changing our worldviews and maps so that we can make wiser decisions. And I say wiser because I think that we cannot control the future, but we can make wiser decisions informed by broader perspective. So that's what I do. It's all about freedom of thought.
Great, I love that. So it's a very good fit with my work and what we're doing here in GerdTalks, and of course the Good Future film. And you're also a member of the Club of Rome, which is an interesting story. We'll talk about that later. Club of Rome, 1972, of course, probably one of the most controversial books in the history of futurism. And what happened with the Club of Rome, and why are we here now, 50 years later, at a worse place than before, right? So what we're going to do now is I'm going to give you a short presentation. I know I always say it's short, it never is, but I will try to keep it as short as possible. And then we'll switch over to Aline, who has sort of her own section for about 7 or 8 minutes. And then we'll take questions and we'll debate the stuff that comes up. So let's dive into the presentation. And my reasons for being optimistic about the future. You know, right now you could really be forgiven not to be optimistic. Right? I look at myself and at my work and the film I made last year about the good future, and I look at everything around us, including climate change issues and energy issues, and of course the coming food crisis and Russia, Ukraine. Yeah, and I tend to say, well, you know, the future better than we think. Maybe it's worse than we think, right? I mean, even I tend to go into that direction, the rabbit hole of negative thought, right? And I always say in my presentation that business as usual is dead or dying, and I think that is so true. We can no longer just continue with what used to work, no matter what business we're in, and especially not if it's about sustainability, it's about climate. I mean, let's face this, and I have something coming up on this very soon. We're going to climate emergency. And this is no longer just far away. And we're seeing right now in this summer what hot means. And that is just a few days now. For example, the UK at the hottest day ever. But in the near future, it's going to be the hottest month ever. Right? And so business as usual is dead or dying. I think that's actually good news because new things can happen. But if you're looking at the world right now, you see the good things, you see the bad things, you see the bad things like climate change that we're struggling with. You see the bad things like, of course, Ukraine, Russia, in this kind of political confusion, geopolitical rearrangement. You see inflation, right? You see all the things that we're worried about there. At the same time, there is kind of a reset going on, makes us think about what we want. Right? And millennials, the Gen Y, is asking for companies to be different. They're also asking for different kinds of investment. And now we have trends around the world where people are saying we're going to pull our money out from the fossil fuel industry. And you have other examples I show later. You have the Extinction Rebellion, now supported by Stephen Fry even, right, taking more dramatic measures in this direction. So it's coming to a head, really, what is going on. It's the crisis also gets opportunity. Now, if you look at this chart, you could also be forgiven for having a negative view, right? Just take a look at all the things that have gotten worse since the COVID crisis. Social cohesion, likelihood of crises, climate action failure, mental health. I mean, basically, World Economic Forum here. The chart goes on until, all the way down the screen, right? The things that are more of an issue. And that leads a lot of people to a dark view that is kind of the opposite of what I expressed in my film, The Good Future, which you need to watch at thegoodfuturefilm.com. And one of the key theories in my book was this one, of course, the future is better than we think. And I still think that's true, but it contradicts kind of what we're currently look at the reality of today, where we're looking at things like this, right? I mean, this is a map of a heat map of the world from the last 4 weeks. Catastrophic, right? And yes, people are dying from heat waves now, but anticipations are that if it goes on like this, it could be 100,000 next year and 1 million the year afterwards. I mean, the numbers are astounding and much quicker than we would have ever thought. All right, so again, one could say, well, the good future, how about the future is worse than we think? Well, when it's about climate change, right? And that drives, of course, the urgency much more when we realize that, this is really emergency territory now. And clearly, again, looking at the numbers here, this is June 1976, the heat map, and this is June 2022. And in the last 20 years, we have generated about 25% of the CO2. I mean, the numbers are, again, it's astounding. And look at the other numbers like this one, the charts are, again, compelling when you see what's happening there with global warming. And on top of that now, inflation here with Lithuania and Estonia and Latvia going up to 15% of inflation, right? The future is worse than we think when we look at this. But then the question really is this: are we heading towards this kind of Armageddon? Right? First, climate Armageddon, technology Armageddon. And this kind of view of dystopia is everywhere. All we have to do is watch television or, God forbid, watch Netflix or any of those shows, right? And then we have the statistics showing that kids around the world, 16 and 25, right, they're super anxious, especially in the southern part of the globe. So just to zoom in on what exactly they are thinking, right? People have failed to care for the planet. The future is frightening. Family security is threatened. Humanity is doomed, right? That's what kids are saying. And I think this is a rising concern pretty much around the world, especially in the Southern Hemisphere. So basically, I can be with Robin Williams, who said this. I hope you did hear that. Let me just make sure we got the right audio mix here. Yes, it should be. This is. Let's play that again because it's so cool, right?
Just doom, nothing else.
That's right there. Yeah, it's just doom, nothing else, right? You could be forgiven for thinking that, I think, right now. So let me bring up the antidote as to why I think we need to get away from this kind of what I call the despondency trap, right? To be despondent, to be dystopian, to think negatively. First, we can look at all of the things in a negative light, like here. Every year, 300,000 women die from pregnancy-related causes. The majority of the world lives in less than $10 a day. 10% live in extreme poverty. Almost a quarter of the world population lives in autocratic regimes, and the list goes on. I can take the same facts, and I can look at it from a time-based point of view, and say, well, let's turn this around a little bit and say the number of women who die from pregnancy-related causes has declined. It's actually gotten better. and the percentage of people living in poverty has fallen to less than 10% in a decade. And the percent of the world living in autocratic regimes has also declined, at least as of this reading, which is about 2 years ago, and so on. So I can take another viewpoint, right? I can have a despondent viewpoint, or I can have a sort of more optimist point of view. And I think this is an important story because also, of course, quite clearly in social media, which is the prime culprit here, I think the bad things spread about 5 to 6 times faster. And this is really a very big deal about social media that we absolutely must address. And the other thing, good things take much longer. To do good things takes longer. It's much easier to do bad things, right? Or it's much better and much quicker to make a dystopian movie. Look at all science fiction, 95% is dystopia, right? Except for maybe Her. Even that is dystopia, right? So good things take longer. And so we have this tendency, as Kevin Kelly says, right, that we need to look at a different direction here. And with this tendency of looking at the negative things much quicker. And he says we should be optimistic not because there's less problems, right, but because our capacity to solve them is larger than we thought. This is a key sentence. You know, Kevin is a great idol of mine, so to speak. Everything he writes is pretty amazing stuff. Of course, he's a co-founder of Wired magazine quite some time ago. He lives in San Francisco. Let me show you a couple of facts here about what is actually better than we thought, right? Technology is getting cheaper and cheaper, enabling us to do things much quicker, like human genome data sequencing. This is the cost per megabase going towards zero, essentially. Lots of things we can do with that. The power of computing is increasing. So we can do stuff like climate control using technology. We have lots of innovation platforms generating trillions of dollars. There's just a partial list here on the left. We have new nuclear fusion reactors coming up. Lots of money going into this, into potentially a safe version of nuclear. We have a sustainability revolution where we can see stuff like protein and transportation already changing in a very large way. And of course, we have the climate change crisis being attacked by climate technology. And that one really allows us to think larger when we look at this curve, right? This is all happening in the next 2 to 10 years. Right? I mean, tremendous progress, pretty much allowing us to have all the tools we need to solve this. So the bottom line is, we have all the tools, we're just going to make the right decisions. That makes me optimistic. At least we don't have a problem with not having the tools or not knowing what to do. We know what to do, we just won't do it, right? So that's another issue we're going to discuss later in the conversation. Key point here, our mistrust of the future makes it hard to give up the past and the present. Right? This is, I think, Noah Pralny, a poet, or a keynote speaker who said this the other day. I picked it up from him. But we have to trust the future, right? So that it's not hard to give up the past. So it's hard to move towards optimism. Optimism is a choice. And again, I think this is very clear when we look at the future. Again, Kevin Kelly says, over the long term, the future that can also be dangerous. So Kevin talks a lot about the alternative. He calls it the Protopia. I love the whale here because it's kind of like, whales don't do that, right? But it's something that we can imagine as a potential future. And lots of great quotes from him on this, right? He says, for example, that Protopia defines a state that is better than today than yesterday, but maybe just a few steps, right? It's a gradual thing. Right? And Protopia is not, this is a great word, it's not like imaginary heaven or nirvana. It's a stepwise approach to improving things. He also says in this article, I'll put the link up here later, he says he's hoping that we can get out of this being blind for the future and that we generate plausible visions of the future, right? And basically thrilling enough to aim towards. And I think this is a really powerful thing to think about how we can tackle the future to create something that's thrilling for us. And he says a summary basically being that it's a slow march towards incremental betterment. That's what Protopia is. I think that's a good strategy. It's not dystopia, it's not utopia, it's not utopia with an EU, that's another version of it. It's kind of like this. You know, we have the burning planet now, and Protopia would be to imagine that we can return it to the state where it was within the next 20 years. I think it's entirely possible. So this is something that I think is a good philosophical background of this. Now, the last couple of weeks, we've seen kind of the opposite happening with the climate bill, the Build Back Better by Biden being utterly defeated because of this Senator Manchin veto. Right? But surprisingly, yesterday, we have the opposite, where basically a new bill came forward from Manchin that was the biggest bill ever in the US, and then it passed. Right? So 2 weeks ago it was nothing, everything was falling apart, and now there's a new deal, right? And here's my good friend
This bill
Biden.
would be the most significant legislation in history to tackle the climate crisis and improve our energy security right away. Give us a tool to meet the
Hello,
climate
Mr.
goals.
President. Keep talking,
set
but
we-
basically this is kind of interesting to see how this Protopia came about, right? With all the pressure that has built up. And it's not that we're hopeless there, it's just we had to reroute first, right? So as I said earlier, we have all the tools, that's the science and the tech, and the money. We also have the money, but we must work on the telos. Telos is the wisdom, the understanding. This is, of course, old Greek word that is widely used by Aristotle, refers to the full potential of something. So this is why I've pledged many times that we should have a council of the wise people, to bring forward the telos. And I think we really need to go back to this, and it can't just be the World Economic Forum or the UN or people within country. We need a global forum for telos, for wisdom, how to change those things. Last thing I'm going to say about Kevin Kelly is this one, where he says a deep history of an idea makes it clear that the optimistic stance of believing something is possible is a requirement. If we want to build a good future, we have to be able to believe that it's possible. That's been my argument all along in the film. And I think that's my argument as to why I feel optimistic, because I think optimists will win the day on this. So I'm going to bring in one more special guest here, Cristina Figueres. She was the leader of the UN at the Paris Agreement 2015. She's probably the reason that we had the Paris Agreement to begin with. She's a Costa Rican diplomat, and we're going to bring in a live commentary from her here right now. Let me just cue this up here with our fancy tech. I love this message. Of course, if you read her book, which is I think called "The Future We Want," about climate change, it's really a powerful book.
Optimism means envisioning our design.
And so I really think that right now, can you bring me back on the full screen, please? Right now, we are at the fork in the road moment. We're at a place where it's essentially emergency time. Right? And this is the fork. It's not just a fork, right? It's a lot of people are saying this is the decisive decade to address climate change, to look at technology regulation, to create a just world. And I'm with Antonio Gramsci, an Italian philosopher. He said that we should have pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will. This is, and I sometimes say optimism of the heart, right? Also, so we should be intellectually curious and ask questions and not be naive, but we should remain optimists. And really, what's happening now is we're heading to emergency 2030, not 2050, and we really need to have immediate action on some of these items. That's why we need the optimism. So the belief that tomorrow can be better than today is an essential requirement. And this is why my pledge is for us to develop that optimism and to groom it and to help each other feel optimistic. And this is, by the way, why the world's 10 happiest countries, you can see them here, led, of course, by Switzerland and Denmark and Finland. And there is optimism that people can feel there. So we should discuss as to why that is, but I think this is going to be really, really important for the future, because I don't want to be in a future that looks like this, where we all feel like a turtle lying on our back when we can't do anything because we feel stuck. Right? I really believe our attitude contains our future. And if our attitude is pessimistic, we'll build a pessimistic future. And that's not something that we would want. So that's my pitch for optimism. And now let's have a conversation. Let's bring back Aline. I know it was a little bit longer than planned, but hey, So Aline, over to you, and please tell us why you have hope and optimism.
Okay, I'm going to start by saying a word. Of course, thank you for inviting me, especially since we agree on a lot of things, and I think we disagree on others, or at least we might have a controversy. And as I was saying, the core of what I'm doing is the art of reperception, so changing how we look and see and think. And for a few years, Jean-Louis, my associate, and I have been calling that shapership. And shapership is a concept we invented, and it's also a practice. So I'll talk about the concept and then the practice. And it's a concept we invented to open new windows in the mind, because obviously you understand that this word is made of to shape, the verb to shape, like in shaping a diamond, and ship like in friendship or in craftsmanship. So a particular skill in a specific field. So shapership is the art of shaping the future, or it's the art of making the future visible. So after we have envisioned it, desirable and actionable. And as such, it's a way to look at reality as it is. So the things we consider normal or orthodox, and to look at the things as they could be in a revolutionary way, so that we can craft new realities. So I'll say a word about reality. And the idea of shapership is not a protopia, it's more a utopia in action. And I insist on the fact that utopia is not the unrealist, but the unrealized yet, as Jacques Monod said. So a utopia in action is based on a desire to transform the world with imagination and action, and not to make incremental changes, or the willingness is more exactly, if you want, to shift completely the relationship we have with the system as it is, dominant, orthodox, based on destruction, competition, and all the things we know, and to shift our relationship, the relationship we have with those ideas, so that we can get unstuck and imagine something which is radically different and based on a completely different set of values, beliefs, maps, worldviews, etc. So the idea of a utopia in action is a transformation rather than just fixing what's failing in the present or having an upgraded version of the present. And I have to say a word about reality, and I'm not pretending that I will teach you anything new, but just to make sure that we are all clear, the real is something we cannot access despite all our efforts, but reality, like all the words in E.T., is the real, what is, within the limits of our own perceptions. Like the word possibility is what is possible within the limits of our own perceptions and beliefs. So if I take this simple idea, the real is something, then we have our filters and our perceptions, which makes it possible for us to make decisions and actions. So our decisions are based on our perceptions, which are a story, a meaningful or meaning-making story we create, because we are story makers. Probably all have read Yuval Noah Harari, who talks about the specificity of the human species, or sapiens, but sapiens demens too. We are creating stories, and in fact, we are constructing reality. It's a map, and our maps might be completely incomplete, or false, or obsolete, or old, or not just. We can travel in a country like Egypt with a map of Australia, and of course, this is all the question. So shapership as such is about utopia as desire and hope, and it's based on the idea that if you take an iceberg, the top of the iceberg is visible, but far below you have our worldviews or maps, and far below you have our intentions or purpose. So I'll come back to this, because I think that our maps, as you know, are completely invisible to us. If you take the story of those two little fishes who are just swimming together, and they cross an old fish, and the old fish asks the two, "Hey boys, how is the water?" They just don't answer. They walk away, and then one of the young fishes says to the other, "What the hell is water?" So that's a bit our situation. We navigate in a notion of ideas and concepts which are almost invisible to us, and we take them for granted. In those, in what we call reality is also the story of our future, because as you know, we have a story of our past, a story of our present, and we have a story of our future. In other words, the future we imagine is the cause of the way we live, we experience life today. For some, it's a story of apocalypse now, the end of the world. For some, it's another story, and it all depends on the way we look at the situation. So I want to emphasize one thing for us before we continue. It's the idea of a double vision. A double vision means there is the present and the future. We live in the present, we make decisions in the present, and so we are in the process of future making. And the vision of the future is, in fact, it might be a dream or not. When we talk about Shapership, the vision of the future is a big yes to a radically different future. So it's like making a hole in the jungle of the representation we have about what is possible. And this vision, transformative vision, is going to create an effect in retrospective. It's going to allow us to re-engage with our life in a different way. So the double vision means the future is a vantage point, a shift in perspective from which we reconsider completely our priorities today. That's why there is a play on word, which I love, made by, I don't remember the name of this author. He created the play on game. The future is nowhere, nowhere. And if you just move one letter, the present is now here. So when we have a future in mind, it's like Einstein, who said a dark room is never dark when you make a hole in it and light enters in. So there is a way to open the future and enlighten the present. And I think that this means that when I practice Shapership, I use this idea that we need to, at the same time, make a lucid criticism of the world we want less of, the present, including the worldviews that support it. And we need also to be able to create an image or a series of visions of the future we desire. So before I go to the practice of Shapership, there is one more thing I want to say very briefly about hope. I prefer hope rather than optimism. To me, hope, and I have to read that sentence, sorry, I don't know it by heart, but Václav Havel said something that really inspired me about hope. He said, hope is not the conviction that something will turn well, but the certainty that something makes sense, regardless of how things turn out. Hope is the dimension of the soul and not an objective assessment of the situation. So I think that there is a leap in faith to make, and hope is a driver for action, but for me, it relies on what I call a soul compass. And let's say that a soul compass is nothing mystical, although it can be, but it's a sort of integrity of the being. And if you clearly go inside, all of us, deeply, honestly, we know at least three things. First, that the world and the way we live, or the way we live and destroy life, is not sustainable. We know that a more beautiful world is possible, and we know that it takes courage to reinvent the world. But I think that courage is the thing that is missing the most at the moment, and for it to, I would say, grow. I think we need imagination, because imagination is about options, and options makes valid decisions too. If we only know one restaurant, we cannot decide between several. So I think that as such, I'd like to tell you a short story about the future as the cause of the present. Ben Bender, who was the chief, the conductor, the chief, how do you say that? The main conductor of the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra, once said to his wife, I'm going to change completely the way I assess my students. And he was having the best musicians in the world from 5 to 12 years old in a course. And he said, the first course I give them, I'm going to give them an A. And he wrote a book about that called The Art of Possibility to show what it changes for those children. The first lesson, they received an A with one condition, to write a letter from the future, from 1 year ahead. Write a letter, but they had to write it 3 months after the first lesson, explaining why they deserved that A. And I read all the letters. And when you have a small little trombonist 5-year-old who says, I was given an A, and it changed everything in my way of playing, he became an A. And all the children became an A. So I think that the way we think about the future is in fact really existential, as Gerd says, and it's really now here. So this nowhere. And putting all that together, I want to tell you that, by the way, Shapership is what? The art of shaping the future for me is about having this capacity, the creative agency, to play with our ideas, to consider that we have good ideas and bad ideas, but they are just maps. That we have the capacity to reperceive things and think big. And it's an invitation to shift from a mad world, mad being the one we live in, which leads to massive assured destruction, to a nomad world, which leads to something else. I call it mutually assured development. And that is an invitation to shift from a perception of apocalypse now to a perception of no apocalypse, not now. In other words, the biologist Bruce Lipton, he created something which is absolutely fantastic. He talked about the imaginal cell metaphor, but it's a biological thing. He says, of course, we see the end of the world as we know, so that's the end of the caterpillar and probably the emergence of the butterfly. But he says something which is connected with the fact that when the caterpillar stops to grow, then the cells which are within, they start to, well, they lose their jobs, so they start to panic. They even commit suicide or apoptosis, while other cells which have always been there, and they are called the imaginal cells, they don't panic at all because they see the future. So they start to cluster. Because of the breakdown, they start to cluster, while the other from the system, the caterpillar system, they attack them. The imaginal cells start to cluster and reproduce at full speed. And because of the fact that they see the future, there is a turning point, and at one moment, the metamorphosis comes up. So about this little illustration, I think we have the choice. Either we just make, like the ostrich, we bury our head in the sand and make as if nothing was happening and continue with the SOS or same old solutions, or we just are locked in what I call apocalypse now, or the nostalgia of the future, which is what young people live now, the feeling that there is an awareness of a future forever gone, which has been stolen. Or we put our energy into creating the future we want based on unorthodox solutions. And to me, it's not about slightly incremental changes. It's because when we solve a crisis, we don't make a system change. It's about the Buckminster-Fuller approach. We need to create a proposition that makes the previous system obsolete. Instead of solving problems, I think we need to dissolve them, to make them unexistent. Now, maybe I'll keep the Shapership as a practice for the questions if Gerd want, because I have used my time. Gerd, if you want.
Great. I mean, lots of great stuff here. I mean, I think it fits together very nicely with everything that I've talked about, but the general kind of idea. I think, hope and optimism, they are related, but hope is kind of something that's in the soul, right? And that actually brings up some questions we had here from people. There was one question about, God and hope, and how can you have hope without God? God questions aren't allowed in this show, but But anyway, no, let's not really talk about that. But I mean, I think ultimately these are really, really powerful questions. I have a question for you, and then we'll go to the other questions here. Coming back from the future, right? The concept that Buckminster talked about, the concept I talk about a lot, is our skill has to be to go into the future, see what we learned there, and come back to today, right? To then address what we have today. So that's imagination, coming back from the future. But a lot of times when I work with people, they want to go from here to the future. So they want to go forward rather than going to the future and coming backwards, right? And I think this is an important exercise. Like, imagination would tell us that, you know, it could look like this. And if we believe in that being possible, for example, the global carbon coin for CO2, or the things that we're talking about to amend climate change, if we think of that as possible, how can we then come back to the day and convince people, right? How do we get people aboard with coming back from the future? How do you do that?
I usually start with looking at the present in a way which leads people to take a stand. I'm just going to give a short explanation. I call it the creative resistance. I think that people know, if they face reality as it is, and if they understand that they participate in that reality, I mean, the world is not something out there. I can use my Nespresso machine. I hope it will function, but I'm not creating the future by doing that. I hope the world is stable at that place. So there is something about looking at the future, at the present situation, looking at what is supposed to be normal, orthodox, admitted, whether you are in an industry like in chocolate, where I worked a few months ago, there are practices that are taken for granted, and they are supported by beliefs. And when people look at that, they can just start to understand that this is also a story. It's not that they have to maintain growth, slavery, function within the norms, etc. So once they have reached the point where I start to ask them to take a stand, it's a statement of position, and I ask them to say a big no to something. And the big no being said, they still don't have the future, but at least they know what they don't want. And then it is possible to unlock something, which is a big yes and a transformative vision, supposedly not something possible, but almost impossible as a vision, so that they restory the future, and it gives them so much hope. And it's you know, Martin Luther King didn't say, I have a nightmare. He said, I have a dream. And it's a long conversation we can have about the fact that it's easier to make dystopia than utopia. But then when they come back, I'm asking them to make the third step, which is, to me, after the transformative vision, it's to jam together. And I position it like that. Jamming together is how we improvise collectively to create the future. And that's also a story. So I hope it answers at least a bit.
Great. Okay, thanks for that. We have a question by Bill Halal. Let's bring that in. Bill was the guest on the last Future show, on the last GerdTalks, I mean. Thanks, Bill, for being there and for contributing the question. If you want to see the show that I did with Bill, just go to GerdTalks.com. You see his latest show. So he asked the question: to have hope, you must have faith. What do you have faith in? Okay, I'm going to answer this briefly, and then you can answer the same. You know, for me, I think I have faith in people, in humans. I think we can do this. I think we're completely capable of change, of collaboration, of good things. I'm not a negative believer in that, you know, people can't get anything done. I do have faith or believe somewhat in science and technology, but probably less than in people. But ultimately, I believe that we can and we will get things done. My biggest fear is that we may be too late, or that we may get way late, or we may get lazy, or we may not be in time anymore. And I think we have a 10-year time frame for that to happen. And so 10 years of faith I still have. So, Aline.
What do I have faith in? I'm forcing myself to remain faithful in what has meaning what is serving life, I would say. I think that when we love people, we want a future for them. So for me, life as such, outside of human and inside and human included, is something absolutely marvelous. But in terms of humans, I think we are capable of the worst and the best, so capable of destroying everything or just be in contact with eros. That's why I call it the erotica of the future. I think that I have hope and faith in the fact that deep inside, all humans are, as Gerd was saying, there is a sort of kindness and deep humanity. And that's something I want to believe, but I must say I want.
Yeah, well, I have the same feeling. I'm optimistic about this, and I don't think there's definitive proof about this. But I was a student of theology when I was 18. I studied Lutheran theology and Greek and Hebrew and Latin and all that stuff. But I don't take my source of belief or faith from that direction anymore. That was a long time ago. But I tend to believe that when you look at everything, everything being equal, I think humans are capable of creating the good future. And I really would like us to collaborate on working that out, how we do this, rather than constantly looking at the bad humans that make, obviously, the headlines these days. Let's bring another question in. Okay, great. Brian Watershoot, thanks for the question. More and more people out there with burnouts, depression, and so on. I believe there cannot be good times without the bad ones. That's true. Without winter, how can one approach the bad times in a more constructive way? Yes. Well, I've talked about this many times in my speeches. I think that, humans really only respond in two ways, or to two things, and that's pain or love, right? We do something when there's pain, and we do something when we fall in love with, people, things, ideas, right? And we need this motivating force. And I think the fact that things are going pretty badly right now in so many ways makes us blind sometimes to the things that are not going badly, but it's also a motivator. Like the whole COVID crisis was a giant motivator that said, pay attention, collaborate, think ahead, right? Plan for the worst, be prepared, right? All those are key messages. And so to take a more constructive view, I think it's a personal thing is, how do we maintain a positive outlook when we're witnessing all the negative stuff raining down on us? And one thing that I personally do a lot, I try to keep away sometimes from the too pessimistic things of the news or focusing on all the things that need fixing. So sometimes I prefer to say, let's look at the things that are being fixed so that we have some positive energy coming from this. I would grant you it's a pretty hard time right now to do that. I mean, I know people personally who died from COVID. I know a lot of people personally who are suffering in the Ukraine. And that sometimes makes you feel like, there's like, it's getting closer and closer and closer to, but I think we can develop a strategy to remain positive.
Yeah. I just, I can say something to Brian. Thanks for the question, by the way. I think that what is, for me, is very, very helpful is what I call creative agency, which I mentioned earlier, which is this capacity we have to reconsider, with the power and freedom, by the way, we have to reconsider the stories we create, the beliefs we have, and to shift our perspectives and to play, in a way, seriously with our ideas. And to consider that is giving me, I say, attitude, it's like a hot air balloon. You choose to navigate a space where there is this freedom to just think from different vantage points and try to navigate or reconsider the present, for instance, and find ways to listen to voices that are unheard within yourself or ancient wisdom. Find places where there are initiatives that give us hope that a more viable future is possible. And listen to our dreams. And by the way, enjoy or have the joy to challenge conventional wisdom. And that's already something. And then take the balloon, move from ego to eco, and start to consider that a more beautiful world is possible, and you might be connected with it from your aspirations. So to me, it's a possibility to just say we are not locked into the present, even if Frederick Jameson once said, it's now easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. But he also said, he also said we are in a complete crisis of imagination, and imagination can be boosted.
Yeah, I mean, like I said in the presentation, I've noticed this many times. If my attitude is more positive and open, then I experience better things. It can be all the way from the cab driver to the people that I meet at the event, right? And this kind of turtle attitude that I see a lot now is like, okay, we're helpless. We can't do anything. We have bad politicians. It's already too late and stuff. It is not helping, right? Because it puts you in a situation where you have no control, no power, no, right? And basically all you can do is move to, the Swiss mountains or, somewhere out in the Canary Islands in a tent, in the caves of Gomera to get away from things. I think, there's very little hope in that kind of thinking. So your attitude contains your future. And I keep saying this, of course, it's a hard thing to always have a good attitude. I don't always have a good attitude, but it is very, very much a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think you can see that in the climate movement. The successful pieces of the climate movement that we're seeing around us, they have a way of remaining positive despite the fact that we're probably not going to make it with the 1.5 degrees, right? So, but if you hang your hopes on the 2.0 degrees, which is much, much worse, right? Maybe that's more realistic. Maybe that's more optimistic, maybe that's more something that we can actually realize. Let's take another question. So Vincent, thank you for asking. What are the 3 top concrete actions we should all take tomorrow to move towards Protopia? Yeah, about small incremental improvements. Good question. The 3 concrete actions. Well, first, I think Protopia for me means realizable, possible actions that are somewhat more doable than saying utopia, for example, that we can bring the planet back to no warming. Right. So Protopia for me would be a very simple step, like saying, okay, let's agree on a global carbon tax, an emergency tax, that we all pay for the next 5 years or so, into a climate change fund. I think Kim Stanley Robinson pointed this out, the science fiction writer, and many others. 3% of global GDP set aside for that would allow us to fix that problem and actually reverse it in the next 20 years. So that would be for me like one step where we could say, let's put money in the pot. Let's generate real action here. Let's voluntarily pay this tax. Let's find a way to actually take that step and to put other things in place that seem tangible action. Other tangible action would be, for example, to agree on carbon taxes for flying airplanes, which I do a lot, and I already pay my carbon tax. But things like that are small steps that are not entirely, large political issues.
Mm-hmm. I cannot answer that question because, as I said earlier, I believe that it's time for radical change rather than incremental solutions, but it does not prevent us from making small changes. And I just want to say one thing. Paul Duhan is a Chinese, French, American young man whom I heard a few years ago say, he was working at Eventbrite, by the way. He says, I'm fed up now with having my company make money in a meaningless sense for me. And he was an algorithm specialist. And he says, can algorithm change the world? And if you Google for video of him, you'll see his smile. He was 22. He said, can algorithm change the world? And the answer is yes. And now he's created an NGO and working on the biggest issues of our time. So he gave himself a purpose, which was higher, and it was out of reach in a way. So I believe this is a kind of step that is available now. It doesn't mean it's incremental. I would prefer us to make big steps right now in our mind.
Yeah, I think that the big step was a small step. It's basically the fact is we're heading towards an emergency scenario. And that is first climate change. That's completely obvious. And it's going to take emergency action. It's no longer about incremental things there. The second one, it's also the emergency of technological dominance, which is becoming an emergency as well, but not as quickly as the climate change one. But we're seeing that sort of opening out there. And then we have a democratic emergency, that people don't believe that democratic systems can do this because our media sucks, right? Our media is an algorithm. So big steps being taken. I think I'm very much for that. And I think we're seeing that right now in the debate of how in the world are we going to take real action on climate change. That's becoming a model for everything else. And a lot of practical considerations, impossible is the new normal, really. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And impossible things will become entirely normal. Like, a year ago, everybody was forced to do X, Y, Z to protect each other, wearing masks, not going out, staying at home. That seemed impossible, right? But we did it. And we're going to have similar emergency scenarios. And I think that is really, really important to realize. At a certain point, all other concerns sort of go out the window, because we have existential survival to deal with.
I'd like to just add one thing just related to that. It's a metaphor, but if you have a liver crisis, for instance, if we have a liver crisis, we know that normal or standard remedies will bring us back to the previous situation. If we have a liver condition, we need to change our life. And I think that this is now what we are. We are in the liver condition on multiple aspects, so biodiversity, etc. So we must admit that anyway, no standard remedy will bring us back. That's what I mean by big steps rather than incremental. It's in our mind first. We need to dare to imagine our way out of the unimaginable.
Yeah, and I think we have history in this. We did that with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. After we had nuclear bombs, we realized, it took 14 years for that to happen, but we did realize that if we have 10,000 more, this is the end of us, right? And so we were able to actually get together, and it's holding up until today, which, for now. But I think we can do this, but this will require some very, very serious collaboration and sort of hyper collaboration, where a lot of things that were previously just arguments will fall by the wayside. And that's all going to happen, I think, in the next year or two, because now it's emergency 2030, right? It's not 2040, it's not 2050. And this is about our kids and their kids, right? It's getting personal, right? And not just on the climate change front, on pretty much every front. Let's bring another question. Are there any problems outside the human mind? Now we're getting philosophical. I'll leave that to you, Aline.
But I think that there is a way to say that worldviews are, let's say, driving the way the world outside is created, or as Einstein was saying, the world outside is a product of our thinking, so we cannot change it without changing our thinking. And I believe, of course, our maps are not the territory, as Korbinski said, but our maps shape the territory. So I would say we have a problem of consciousness, as somebody was mentioning. There is currently a revolution in consciousness. And I don't think it's in our mind. I think it's our way of being as such. Which need to be completely regenerated in the way we live as such. And to me, it's all about finding more conscious ways of operating and wiser ways of operating. Now, do we have any problem outside the human mind? I wouldn't say we are the cause of everything, but we are interacting. So we might consider that reconsidering our place as Anthropocene in being able to succeed, access our own humanity, sapiens, instead of being sapiens demens, seems to me to be the problem at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, we discussed it in the last show when I talked with Bill Halal, who's hopefully still on the call here. But when we talk about global consciousness, right? And this is really what we need. We need to get away from this individual consciousness and this idea of individual progress and individual things. And moving towards a global consciousness. And I think that is a 20-year time frame. This is already starting to percolate. Yeah. It's interesting to see when you talk to millennium people, Gen Y kids between, say, 20 and 35. Many of them don't think of themselves as being citizen of one country, for example, right?
Yeah.
They already think like a world citizen, right? And that's part, of course, because of the internet and connectivity and so on. But I think it's dramatically changing. In this moment in time, in the next 10 years, we're either going to find a way there, or our consciousness will not be enough to actually solve the issue. And this is why that is the emergency action that we need to undertake right now, that goes beyond all economic worries, and also, of course, creating a new economic logic that goes beyond this single focus on profit and growth, which, we talk about that, we'll get into another 1-hour conversation. We're going to take one more question, and all other questions, you could submit also later when we have the YouTube version up and running. You can continue to chat. So, what role should institutional governance play to achieve real change that we urgently need?
Well, I think that the dominant actors at the moment, just dominant actors are as political as businesses. And there is a tendency for them to play it safe. I would say the world, the business as usual is remarkably resilient, if we might to say. They are kidnapping all the concepts to make as if they were transforming things or disrupting, but still disrupting without any purpose or any vision. And I think that's crucial. So I believe that there is what Otto Scharmer years ago, I think in 2003, he called an awareness-based governance. And we need a completely new collaboration between citizens, businesses, NGOs, and all institutions, rather than have everyone fight for their own survival, including government. That's my point of view.
Well, to me, it's clear that the role of government, and maybe not institutional governance, but government in general, is exploding in importance, because every problem we're having is a larger problem. It's not like a problem of climate change in Switzerland. It's a global problem. It's an energy problem, security, safety, cybersecurity, and all these things. They're global issues. So we may be deglobalizing as far as supply chain goes, getting things from more local sources. That may be true. But in general, our biggest issues are global issues. And so really what it takes now is the realization that energy, water, food, security, disease, spacefaring and so on, those are all issues that we're forced to collaborate on. So I see the role of government increasing, and I also see a lot of people asking for different kinds of leaders in government. I'm convinced, and that's already quite true, we're going to see more women, we're going to see more young people, we're going to see entire changes in regimes. A lot of the populists and autocrats are waning because they haven't done a good job with anything. And democracy will come back as part of the rejuvenation of media and the sort of renaissance of humans, I believe. But so there's big changes coming up. I wish there was another 50 Jacinda Ardern's, New Zealand and different countries. And I think we are seeing some. We're seeing that in Iceland. We're seeing it now in Colombia. We see it in Germany, where the head guy is the chancellor is a man, but everybody else is a woman, right? Right after him. And we're seeing tremendous changes here. And I think we have to get ready for this. A new generation is going to come into politics, and it isn't my generation. It is between 30 and 50. And I think that fills me with great hope, also because the speed will increase. But again, I would say apart from institutional governance, it's going to be important that we have a council of the wise people. I think that is so crucial, because the council would be people who are thinking above any of the political or economic or World Economic Forum /UN issues, but like a guidance, like in ancient Greece. What is the right thing to do? What kind of future do we want? What makes us human? Go back to Star Trek, right? Remember that Star Trek? That the only positive science fiction movie that's been a long time. The Council of Wise People is not a council of CEOs. So I think that's something we really have to think about, that because we're going to need a lot of wisdom. We have so much tools, we're like, it's unlimited, you know, we can do whatever we want with technology. But where is the telos, you know, and who has the telos? We have Jacques Attali in France, and maybe Noam Chomsky in America. You know, they're all over 90 years old, right? Something like that. Where are the new ones? You know, let's bring them forward. Let's do one more question, and then we wrap up. Okay, we'll do a short answer on this one. Okay. So I know we have quite a few more people. Chris Perry again. Well, thanks for being there again, Chris. Right? Global awareness is the motivation for global solutions that brings hope, wisdom unfurled. Well, that actually is a very good wrapping comment. Right? And this is something I personally am driving for, is try to achieve the sort of furthering that. Right?
But I would say, I don't know if what Chris is saying is global meaning holistic or global in the sense of worldwide. You know, I think that we are at a time where system issues require system solutions, but I'm not sure they are all global. But by the way, I think that we need to have a global awareness, so to be connected to the imperatives of the world. But this is also about being able to be very, very, have a granularity that is meaningful for people locally.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the system solutions, I think I totally agree with you on that. However, I would say there are system solutions and then there's personal solutions. They're not really exclusive. They can happen at the same time.
Yeah.
You know, there's system reboots that we must make. For example, declaring fossil fuel activities a crime.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that would be the most logical solution, a system solution for saying, you know, if you invest in fossil fuel, you invest in a criminal activity. That's really what it is. You know, it sounds extreme, of course, but, you know, it's time for extreme measures. So I want to wrap this up in a good way. As I like to say, the future is better than we think. I hope we were able to contribute a little bit to that. You can find out more about the show at GerdTalks.com. We have a little micro website for this, and of course on YouTube. This is number 12. Number 13 will be after the summer vacation. Aline, where can people find out more about your work? Maybe we can bring in the website or the book.
Yeah.
Bring in the book as well.
No, it's not that website. It's the other website. It's Shapership. Sorry, it's just shapership.com or org.
Right.
And then there you can find the concept, the book, and any other things, including a blog and some conferences. That's what we have started before the COVID, just to shift our own activities to Shapership.
Great. And of course, there's a QR code there on top that people can scan to find out more about your work and your book, Shapership, which I think is on Amazon, right?
Yeah, the prototype version. Yeah. There's a version.
Okay.
No, there is a version in French, and there is a prototype version still on Amazon, which is, I think, it's edited by the university. It was a poor edition, but at least the concepts are there. It's very short.
It's always work in progress. Like my book, I want to rewrite it, but now it just came out in Farsi, in Persian language, and I don't want to read. I don't want to redo 15 editions of my book. So anyway, so it's a great pleasure. Thanks for for being part of the show, Aline. And
thank you very
also,
much,
I hope
Gerd.
to see you down the road. And
yes.
For everybody else, we're going to show a short trailer with my film, as we do with all the Gerd talks. So you know what my film is all about, TheGoodFutureFilm.com. I want to thank you very much for being part of this, and please spread the word, and also the link when we're done. It's going to